And listening to Issues and Answers on the WCEG Talk Radio Network. WCEG stands for Worldwide Community Empowerment Group. I am your host, Norman A. Carter Jr. Our goal is to enlighten your perspectives about our environment, our socio-political struggles, and those banes of classism and racism that make all of our lives more difficult than they should be. In so doing, our hope is to bring us all together in a human tapestry of brotherhood and sisterhood, bound together by threads of understanding, respect, and tolerance of our physical, racial, and religious differences. Now, those of you who are currently watching, we thank you. Inform your neighbors, friends, and associates that we can be viewed live via YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and over several streaming devices such as Roku. And if you're on Facebook, you can always text in your questions and comments. Our podcasts are available on Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, and JioSaavn, that's from India, platforms. All of our programs are archived on YouTube and can be viewed by anyone at any time. Before I begin this program with our important guest host, I would like to reflect on the current horrific events in Israel. We certainly have listeners in that area or listeners with relatives in that area. We pray for you, Israel. We pray for innocent Palestinians. We pray for all who are caught up in this mayhem born of selfishness and pseudo-religious dogma. These humans are caught up in a senseless and inhumane massacre. All of us pray for peace, but we must understand that the ungodly have no understanding of peace. May their walls come tumbling down so that all will realize this world is big enough for all. Please understand the topics and opinions on Issues and Answers are those of the host and my guest host, and not the WCEG Network, so leave my boss alone. Now let's get moving on this installment of Issues and Answers. My guest host today is Mr. Robert Lee. Robert, welcome again to WCEG.
Appreciate it, Mr. Carter. Glad to be back with you.
Thank you. Now, for many of you, Robert, I'll let you know, disclaimer here, Robert and I first met on WCEG about 7 years ago, believe it or not. And this is before I became a show host. We were both guests of Reverend Joe Flint on his People's Choice program, I do believe. So for you, those of you who are not acquainted with Robert, let me introduce him to you. Robert has a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from Colorado State University. He is an activist, community leader, and visionary entrepreneur. He's based in Georgia and now heads the Lessex family of companies. This is a dynamic conglomerate offering tailored solutions in political consulting, digital strategies, and direct mail campaigns. Man, I should have checked him out. The distinct brands under his helm are Lessex Media, Lessex Agency, and Lessex Direct. Each is specifically crafted to help clients redefine their approach to growth and community outreach. Robert is deeply embedded in community empowerment. He serves on the advisory board of the East Cobb McCleskey YMCA, which is a testament to his commitment to holistic growth and community upliftment. Robert Lee is the perfect guest host to engage in a discussion about compromise and governance, working towards the greater good. Welcome, Robert. Let's just jump right on into it.
Absolutely. Let's do it. Hope I live up to that. I have to admit, we use a lot of AI, and I got AI to help me write that bio. And now that I'm listening to it, it sounds much greater than anything I've written myself.
Well, I must admit that that I was so impressed so many years ago. And I think you and I have gone back and forth over the past few years about just getting together for a program like this, and we finally were able to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
I'm really glad to see that. Let's start off with something simple. Why has the word compromise become a four-letter word? And does our inability to compromise impede holistic, like that word, governance?
Well, I think in the modern media environment we live in, we have to understand that most media is not doing what you do, which is trying to find answers to problems. Most media, and this is left and right, is driven by infotainment. And compromise doesn't make for clickbait, and clickbait doesn't make for advertising dollars. And obviously, with no advertising dollars, modern media doesn't stay in business. All right. So we have to understand at some level, we allow ourselves to be taken over by this clickbait environment that we operate within. And I mean, I see it as a digital advertiser. Our entire goal is to get people to click links so that we can then begin the sales process. And modern media is very much that same way. And when you just look at the sheer volume of that type of information, not to mention how easy it is to dive in to that environment with the modern internet, people are just kind of overwhelmed. And so people that aren't interested in compromise dive in even more and start screaming louder. And people that we do want to be in positions of authority, people that know how to talk to one another, people like you, and I don't know about me, but people like you,
Definitely.
right, who are willing to listen to people like me, even if we disagree. More and more people are taking a stance of, well, I've got more important things in my life to worry about. And so they're blocking out any opportunity to serve because they just don't want to get yelled at. And so we've got to figure out how to break this cycle of allowing people to use us as clickbait. And I don't have a perfect answer for it, but I think part of the answer is guys like you and me, gals like Penny, standing up and just remembering that respect is at the center of what holds our system together.
You know, it takes me back to a class that I had at Temple University that I'm so glad I took it. It's a class called Critical Thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it really opens your mind to things like getting into rhetoric. and you know, one of the things that I mentioned here is it's about messaging and understanding when rhetoric is not based in reality.
Mm-hmm.
We go back for people beyond my age where the chicken in every pot rhetoric, you know, at one time that was a lot of people went for that. And now we have people coming up with other things that when you think about them and really think them out, they really aren't based in reality.
Yeah.
So
and sorry to cut you off, but
no, go right ahead.
That's the thing, is that it doesn't matter if they're based in reality or not. Words have tremendous amount of power. And just think about the next time you say something that isn't intended to be nasty or mean to your spouse or a good friend or your children, but you say it the wrong way and you just see the look of devastation on their face, right? Words have a tremendous amount of power. And the people that are driving that clickbait understand that. Understand that from the perspective of using it as a business model. But the people like you that we need in local
Mm-hmm.
government, and you know, I'm a proud donor to your campaign running in Snellville.
Absolutely, thank you.
Because I know that you want to use the power of our communication to make people's lives better, regardless of what background they come from, regardless of what governing philosophy they have. I think you and I share the same belief that at the end of the day, it's about stopping bad people and helping good people, regardless of whether or not they're Republican, Democrat, conservative, progressive, left or right. And so when you go back to rhetoric, we just have to understand that good people have just as much power in their hands. We just have to figure out how to show them again that it's worth standing up and uplifting people to do amazing things in the world.
Now, one example of rhetoric that I had noted, and this is a very simple one. The basis of our government is that it is of, by, and for the people.
Mm-hmm.
But we have people who speak of the government as if it's some nebulous entity with godlike powers and endless resources. And this is convenient for those who practice rhetoric, not based in reality, but it gives millions a distorted view of what government and governing really mean. And I think that that's the danger. We hear people talking about, well, the government will do this, and the government should do this, and the government should do that. The government should pay for this. The government should pay. The government is us.
Mm-hmm.
It's us. And I think we've lost sight of that on both sides of the equation.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. We absolutely have. I mean, we go back to, and I'm not a Republican. I'm not a conservative that sits here and says that we were perfect at our founding. We obviously had injustices documented into our governing documents. I acknowledge that, and I think you're silly not to, right? But nevertheless, when we go back to the founding of this country and the steps that we've taken over time, the most amazing moments in our history are the moments where we started to reinvest in one another. Mm-hmm. And understand that government is there to protect our capability to look at each other and say, let's go make this world a better place. And, you know, we look at founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and I love this example, because when they became political rivals, they became intense political rivals. I mean, Thomas Jefferson had a newspaper publisher called John Adams something like a hermaphroditic blob, without the manliness of a man and without the sensibilities of a woman. Right. I mean, it was that. I mean, that's some pretty,
that's cruel.
That's some cruel language when you're talking late 1700s, early 1800s. But most people forget that they rekindled their friendship after their public lives had ended, because they both saw that how miserable the presidency could be. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died on the same day.
Yes.
John Adams' last words were, Thomas Jefferson lives. And in some ways, he truly does with our kind of rugged individualism in this country. But that's the kind of thing we have to hold on to, right? And again, you look at every horrible thing that has happened in our human history, both in terms of our country and in the greater globe. There are just as many stories of amazing things happening, of men and women, of all colors, of all religions, of all backgrounds, looking at one another and saying, we can do this. And that's when we go back to the theme of the show, that's what we have to remember. The root of compromise is it isn't coming to some sort of agreement because agreement is good. It's coming to some sort of agreement and some sort of shared mission and shared purpose to look at one another and say, I want to do this with you. And I want to have this experience with you. I want to share a better world with you. That's the root of compromise. And it's just something a lot of good people have remembered, but have disassociated with public life because they don't see it there anymore. And it's really become a tragedy as a result. Our system of government has become a tragedy because good people have pulled back.
I think you mentioned something that a lot of people lose sight of when we talk about the fathers, the founding fathers. And they were smart enough to know of their own infallibility. Mm-hmm. Their fallibility. And there's those words that say, in order to form a more perfect union. They knew that what they had wasn't perfect. and they were setting the stage for others to come behind him and try to make this all better. And even now, you hear intelligent leaders talk about this American experiment, and that's what it is. I mean, it's an ongoing process. But which gets to my next point here before I'm going to get into something a little bit more global. But as they are today, are our political parties, as they are currently constructed, outdated and out of touch?
So it's really funny. I've always thought the political parties in this country served a very good role in the sense that they were more coalitions than actual parties. And you compared our system, the two-party system, to something like Europe or really any sort of parliamentary system. Coalitions are built after the government is formed. So in other words, you could have a center-right party partnering with a left-leaning Green Party to get a governing majority. And it creates some really weird policy solutions that oftentimes are involved more in horse trading than they are in actually doing good things, which is why it is that economically we see the United States generally outperform Europe year over year because our policies, although broken in many ways, still have a consistency to them. And so when you look back at American history, or at least recent American history, the fact that we had these coalitions of people that were moving in the same direction and two coalitions that were moving in the same direction, I think spoke to the strength of our quote unquote two-party system. But it isn't that way anymore because you have both parties being torn by these extremes that want us to operate the two parties as more European style parties. And what that means is that the parties actually shrink in size, but they're still codified in law as being the two primary governing coalitions. And so people feel more and more ostracized from that. And that's a common reflection of breaking down of institutions in the digital age. We see that religious institutions, social institutions, civic institutions, political institutions are all shrinking in size because they don't know how to operate in that regard, and people are becoming a little bit more specific. So I would say the parties are not broken. The concepts work if we remember the core of why those parties worked, which is we're all Americans, we all have commonalities, we all are here for the same purpose, even if we disagree with some nuanced ways to get to that purpose. I mean, it goes back to the issue of compromise, like this entire episode between you and me is centered around, right? We have to remember that we are a grand coalition as a country because we're all just so different and weird and unique. And I mean, you're from Philadelphia. I grew up in Wyoming, two night and day different places. I mean, just absolutely night and day different, right? There's probably more people on the block that you grew up in than the entire city that I grew up in. And at the end of the day, if we can remember that, then the party system can work, and it actually serves a really good purpose. Because I would still rather us maintain those sort of grand coalitions than more European style political parties, which are just a bunch of nonsense and just as much fighting as we have, right?
I'm sitting here because political consultancy is part of what you do. Do you ever get in like resistance? Because I remember what you're saying today is very similar to what you were saying when I first met you. So I don't see that big of a change from them. And I was totally amazed to listen to you. I probably didn't show it at that time, but I was absolutely amazed.
No, it's funny you say that, but there's one thing I remember you saying to me on that show. And I remember you talking about your book and me sitting back saying, man, this guy's got a really interesting story. And then I remember Joe starting to talk about what we do. And you literally said something to the effect of, I don't know what you're running for, but I'd vote for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, we've been fast friends, but I think that's because
Yes.
we look at the world in a similar way, right? We want good people to do amazing things, and the world is a better place when good people are empowered. So,
And it's, disclaimer, because I'm really now involved in the political sphere a little bit. But as I move around and I'm talking to people, Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, and some with no political affiliation at all, I find that there's a lot of commonality more than there is differences. And the differences that you normally hear on television and through the media, because as you said, the squeaky voices, they get the attention, and the common people don't want all of this chaos in government because it doesn't work for anybody's good. It
no.
really doesn't. Um, and one of the things I brought up is that and I've spoken about this on my program several times, is it's irritating to me to hear people say, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I'll always be a Democrat, Democrat this, Democrat that, or I'll always be a Republican. I was Republican, blah, 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 blah. Republicans are the greatest thing. Democrats are the greatest things. A lot of these people don't realize that political platforms change. And one of the things that I point out, which a lot of when people turn off when I talk about it, is my best example is the Democratic Party. Not bashing Democrats, okay? Not bashing Republicans, but let's talk about fact. The Democratic Party in the 19th century championed slavery and fought against civil rights and integration through the majority of the 20th century. Their political platform didn't change until the mid to late 1960s. Because it was the Republicans who were trying to free slaves and not the Democrats. It was the Republicans who, there was a Republican president who sent the troops down to see to it that schools were integrated. It wasn't Democrats. And that whole philosophy has flipped. I don't know whether it's a pragmatic flip or not, but we have both major parties are guilty of extremism. And we talked about that because they take up most of the oxygen in the political arena. And the moderates are looked upon as being fence walkers, and fence walkers is looking as being another 4-letter word. The moderates don't get the airing or the exposure that they should. And moderates doesn't mean that you're wishy-washy or flip-flops. It means that you look at all your options, and the word compromise comes in again.
Yeah.
Nobody gets everything that they want. No one. It doesn't. Our country has never worked that way.
No, not at all. I mean, the Constitution itself is a compromise document.
Yes.
I mean, it reflects the intensity of conversations that took place after the Articles of Confederation, which was a much more hardline, firm stance document after the revolution. I mean, we forget our roots are born in people that may have not liked one another at a particular moment, using compromised positions to get something over the line, and then eventually get the state legislatures to ratify it. It takes me, I mean, everything you talk about takes me back to a debate question. I can't remember if it was in 2012 or 2016 or whatever it was, but obviously I'm a Republican, so I'm watching Republican debates. And I remember this one question being asked of, would you raise taxes 1 penny if you got 9 pennies back in spending cuts? And to me, that's a no-brainer. I mean, I'm a fiscal hawk, right? I mean, I'm the type of Republican you talk to that wants to privatize Social Security, privatize Medicare, privatize Medicaid. I know that's extreme, and I know it'll never happen in the way that I want it to happen. But if somebody was willing to stand up and say, yeah, let's talk about privatization in this way, can you give me this? I'd be like, yeah, 100%. If it was choosing between one of those three federal government programs, protecting one and cutting back another, I'd take that compromise every single day. Why? Because all three together, as they're constructed right now, are bankrupting our federal government. It isn't the discretionary spending. It is those three programs. So I would absolutely, as a fiscal hawk, take that compromise. And I remember that debate question for presidential candidates, and all of them were kind of wishy-washy on the answer, as opposed to taking a hard, firm yes. I was really disappointed that they all kind of danced around it a little bit. And so that's, again, it goes back to the idea of compromise and understanding if it gets you closer to your goal, it shouldn't be a bad thing that it gets somebody closer to theirs as well. I mean, that's what our society's built on. Contracts, family negotiations. I mean, everything we do is about a give and take between people.
And that flows into something, this is weird, to something that I was going to bring up next, which is the normalization of deficit spending and national debt. And these are practices which are anathema, for want of a better word, to anyone with the slightest knowledge of economic stability. Why does it persist? And why don't Americans understand this cannot continue if we are going to be a solvent and sovereign nation? I mean, the one thing we don't talk about is that we owe money to China because we borrowed money from China. That's scary.
It 100% is. And this again is a fiscal hawk myself. I look at this and just say, I mean, I hope my daughters, I hope my grandchildren never have to suffer the economic fallout. But at some point, it's going to become not just unaffordable, but absolutely economically devastating. And when it becomes that way for us as the United States, the world regresses by leaps and bounds. I mean, we saw what continues to happen to this day in Greece, who essentially had to default on their debt and then essentially cut back everything to the bone. They can't get good governance in place because they can't have a ruling governing coalition that actually does what needs to be done. Now, that's the impact of it. Why people don't want to understand that is because we have this society where everything is driven by clickbait. Everything is driven by, you deserve this, so take it. And if somebody takes away a government program, a government form of largesse, a tax break, this or that, it isn't the end of the world for you, but collectively, or I mean, it could be the end of the world for you, but collectively, all of those things added together are the end of the world for all of us at some point. I mean, look, debt can be managed, small forms of debt, I don't necessarily have a problem with in the short term. But we can't be spending $1 trillion more every year than our government is bringing in tax revenue. You think those Social Security checks and Medicare benefits and Medicaid benefits are bad now? Wait till they have to be cut in 1 year to get back to some sort of sense of budget sustainability. I mean, it will be absolutely devastating.
Yeah,
but
I think this goes back to a cloudy entity called the government, where people continually say the government will do this, the government will do this. And what the phraseology needs to be turned around to say, can we afford to do this? Because it's us, it's our tax money. We pay the taxes to support this thing called the government, but I don't know. It's going to take a re-education that begins probably in elementary school and just be carried through. That we all need to become financially educated about finances and
Oh
how
yeah.
you just can't keep accumulating debt and say that this is okay.
100%. 100%. I mean, that's, and one of the best ways to do that, I know this is getting off a little bit on a tangent here, but student loan debt. I mean, we have this huge debate of whether or not it's justified or unjustified to forgive student loan debt. But I look at it like, one, we're focusing on the wrong conversation in college readiness. We should be talking about career readiness for students, not college readiness. And so what ends up happening when you talk about college readiness is you're educating people poorly about what their options are. So they think they have to take on a bunch of debt to go to the ever expanding or ever increasing inflationary costs of higher education. So that's one of the problems. And that goes back to the education you're talking about. Two, I mean, student loans are nothing more than credit card debt. Essentially, they're treated as such. They're traded and sold and bought as such. And so we have this entirely erroneous isn't the right, egregiously federally backed student loan system that basically says the federal government will guarantee every loan that goes out there. So, and subsidize them while kids are in school. So you have these companies that are jacking up interest rates because they know the government's going to pay that interest while students are in school. I mean, it all goes back to this mindset that we have as Americans. And we used to have this mindset of, yes, life isn't fair, but we can make it more fair when we trust people around us to help. Right. Again, that's not to trivialize the suffering that people go through when they live in poverty. I think it just informs like my mindset, which is I don't want anybody to suffer, but the things that we're doing now don't help alleviate suffering. They only mask it or exacerbate it or shift the blame for who it belongs with, rather than just say there's nobody you can really blame, but there's plenty of opportunity for us to help one another out. And so, I mean, it's all of us as Americans. We live in this tremendously debt-fueled society, and that's why I think our government is reflective of that, because we don't ever stop to ask the question: should we take on this debt versus can we? And we ask the question way too much: can we?
Well, we can go from debt, and I guess this figures into our budget and our deficit, and probably the conditions of the world. Right now, we're engaged in fights over our military budget as it relates to Ukraine and now Israel. And it's tough decisions are going to have to be made. And we're going to have to find, I think, unity among that in that political sphere, and all of this unnecessary infighting is going to have to stop. Otherwise, we're going to be in a very chaotic situation where the wrong people are going to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and that's, I think when you look at all of these conflicts around the world and the initiators of these conflicts, again, this is not to say that that Ukraine or Israel are perfect states and bastions of perfection in how governance should occur. But you look at what disunity, lack of compromise, lack of a common purpose can do to a particular state. I mean, Ukraine has been fighting with itself for generations about what good governance is and what governance actually is fundamentally. Right. And you saw that Russia, who is a failed state in and of itself after the fall of the Soviet Union, took advantage of that. And what we saw in Israel is definitely a demonstration of how fighting with one another over our own self-interest without the consideration of how we can create a win-win situation for everybody has actually led to the conditions that Iran, and Hezbollah and Hamas were able to take advantage of with this cowardly attack on civilian lives in southern Israel, because you had the government that was falling apart almost on an annual basis over judicial reforms, and highly unpopular judicial reforms. And so at some level, if we don't get our act together and understand that there are evil forces in the world that don't need compromise in their own little spheres because they just are tyrants and bloodthirsty tyrants at that we could create conditions for ourselves to fail because we can't share a vision on what to do. And I understand people that have this idea that says we shouldn't be involved in foreign conflicts. I respect their opinions on it. Hopefully there's a way to find a way to compromise with those folks. But on the same token, compromise also means recognizing who it is that you can't build a relationship with and just ignoring them.
Right.
And leaving them.
Exactly. And I always, this is my own personal analogy, but now I think that other people are taking it up too. That's and I'll go to the incursion into Ukraine. Well, it began with the incursion into Crimea, and then it just gradually progressed. But this is similar to Germany and Sudetenland, and then to Czechoslovakia, and then to Poland. And we still had people here saying, well, we shouldn't get involved in European conflicts. And then it got out of hand. And it became World War II. And if we don't get our hands on what's going on now with these extremists, even some of these extremists in our country, and I'm talking about extremists on both sides, and on both sides, they're dangerous. That we're going to have a global disaster where no one will be free. Literally, no one, because we'll be all involved in some sort of conflict. And that's not good for us as a country. It's not good for us as a world.
No, it's terrifying and heartbreaking to think about. So it because I try to be an internal optimist, my hope is that we're in the swing of just these really chaotic times because we're in the swing of these generational changes. And hopefully we all kind of calm down at the end of this generational change and say, you know what? It's out of the system. We get back to this period of finding a way to build a more prosperous world for everybody.
Yeah. And I think that we touched on this is that unfortunately the media is attracted to the extremes because the extremes get all the oxygen in the room. But as a public, we need to start demanding to hear from the voices of moderation, voices of reason. There are just things that are just not based in reality. I could touch on some. I hate to bring this up, but I'll bring it up anyway.
Sure.
We have a popular thing going on now about reparations for descendants of slaves, so on and so forth. And those are some sort of financial remuneration. But who pays for that? And you cannot continue to say the government. You can't continue to say the government and that they owe us and first of all, how do you determine who gets paid? Because we're now an amalgam of so many different things. I mean, where does the line stop? And where do you, it's very difficult. I mean, you have families today that are a mixture of descendants of both slave owners and slaves. And now these have become one family. through marriage all over the years. So how do you're playing people against each other, and they're bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. So let me just
Yeah.
let me preface everything I'm about to say with, I was just my old man was a car salesman from Wyoming. If I had all the answers, I'd probably own everything, but I don't. So I clearly don't have all the answers. But for me, as a marketer, as a consultant, I try to look at the world through the lens that I understand best, which is that. And you really have a core fear and frustration for people, which is economic despair, right? There are a good number of Americans that feel stuck. And I empathize with that. I mean, hopelessness is the worst feeling in the world. So in many cases, you have people that take advantage of that, and you have people that sit there and use that and say, I need to find an answer because I'm stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at things like the Black Lives Matter movement. Full support. I'm not going to say I was a full supporter. All I know is that I had neighbors and friends that had genuine concerns about what was happening in our society. And I cared about them. I cared about them, right? I cared about them as individuals, as friends, as family members. And they themselves had very differing opinions as Black Americans as to what that movement meant. But I see men and women that I care about who say, we have to fix some things in society. And I say, yes, I totally agree. How can I help? What can I do to help?
Mm-hmm.
And then I see people that are pilfering millions of dollars off of this movement to buy second and third multi-million-dollar homes. And it disgusts me. And it's the same thing in every political movement in the society. You have these movements on the right and the left that are being played by people that look at us as nothing more than sources of revenue and provide nothing back in value. I'm okay with people making millions if they provide value back to the people that they're taking advantage of. Or, well, they're not taking advantage of them in that case. So when I hear conversations of reparations or Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter or whatever sort of downtrodden collective group of people, I want to ask the question, what hopelessness do we have to solve?
Mm-hmm.
And let's start with the conversation of, what do you expect from me? Because if I can get a good understanding of that, it doesn't matter if I'm Black or white or male or female, old, young, it doesn't matter. If I know what you expect, I can begin to offer what I'm capable of. And then that's where we start coming to a common understanding of, all right, well, I need this, you can give me this. Let's figure out a path forward with that. And that's how the world becomes a better place, right? And then the conversation stops becoming about reparations or who gets what. It becomes about, what's the next win that we can get together? What else can we do that's amazing? When's the next program that Norman and I can talk about these wonderful things that are ailing our world? I mean, I instantly feel better after seeing posts that you make on Facebook or watching some of your shows. I instantly feel better because I'm like, there's a man who's a good man. And when I've talked to Penny, it's the same thing there at WCEG. I just feel good about the world. And that makes all of those tough conversations easier to have.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Easier to accept the answers of, even if they're not exactly every answer that we want. So,
yeah, there's no perfect solution, because as you said, if we knew, because we are who we are, perfection is always going to escape us.
mm-hmm.
But we can never stop trying to move towards that goal and set forth achievable goals that work for the greater good of everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't want to, again, go back and fall into where we're creating something it's going to work for some people, but it's not going to work for others. And now you have this imbalance again. And when we talk about hopelessness is the dietary food of terrorism, because that's what where hopelessness. That's how hopeless. That's what feeds terrorism, is hopelessness, and people taking advantage of that. And again, people need to be aware of, no matter how righteous the cause seems to be, that you really need to be, I'll say this again, a critical thinker before you invest your time, your soul, your money into something that may be benefiting a few people rather than working for the greater good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely right.
Of course,
Absolutely right.
I could have it all wrong. I don't know, but
hey, well, look, either way, if you're wrong, I'm wrong too, because I think we're gonna sink on that same ship one way or another. So I'm okay with that.
As long as our intentions are good and they're not self-serving, and I think that was one of the things that I remember when I first met you, and I heard about your political stance on a lot of things, and I said, this guy's a Republican. It's not the kind of Republicans I've been hearing about.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's crazy. I would tell you that most Republicans I know, I mean, they're not exactly like me, but most that I know are just normal everyday people. And most Democrats that I know are just normal everyday people, right? In our neighborhood, where my wife and I live out in Dallas, we have a very diverse neighborhood. And the one thing that binds us all is that we love living in the neighborhood that we do, right? We do a fireworks show every year. We have one of those Facebook groups that it's not filled with a bunch of Karens complaining about their neighbors. We're cracking jokes with one another.
Right.
It saddens me that I'm not more like the Republicans that you hear about, because I think there's more of us than there are, the angry type folks. But even still, it's funny we go back to that. We do a lot of digital training for Republicans to say, here's how to understand how to use social media, how to tell your story. And in our party, even though I'm not an active member of the party much anymore, there's all this conversation about unity. We have to be unified. We have to be unified. What for? Because we can't be Democrats. And I try to tell folks, what's the purpose of unifying around not being something else?
Right.
Why don't we unify around being something amazing for people and delivering hope and optimism? And when I do these trainings, and that's the message that I deliver, I have people from all sides of the Republican Party coming together and saying, thank you. I really enjoyed what you had to say. And so when we just remember that hope and purpose and just that human spirit is something we're fighting for, we just make the world a better place, regardless of what side that you come from. And we actually find that we are more in common than we are opposed to one another. And we can disagree about policy, that's fine. But when we are willing to give each other enough respect to say, this guy wants the same thing, this gal wants the same thing I want, which is good, happy, healthy, safe, productive, content people in the world, I think we can get through anything doing that. So it warms my heart that you say that about me. And it means my old man raised a good guy that is doing something good in the world.
I listen to you and I think about something that I read several years ago. And I think it involved Ted Kennedy, and I forget who the other person was, but they were a Republican. And they were publicly at odds with each other all the time. But what I found out is that they had a public persona, but after 5 o'clock, they would go over to some club somewhere and they would have cocktails and they would discuss things. And they would say, basically, okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of this if you can give me a little bit of that. and they sit down and they talk. This didn't happen like 1, 2, 3, but over a period of time, because number one, they trusted each other, and they respected each other, and they were able to come up with and this is not just those two, but it's the way the system worked, with legislation that worked for the common good of all people. And I think that we've not totally, but our leaders have lost the ability to have those backdoor conversations with people whom they disagree with in their public life, but with whom they need to speak with and establish relationships with in order to get things done. And I think that's become a skill or a talent that has evaded us in recent years, and we really need to get back to it.
It absolutely has, and it's understandable at the national level because it's just so media driven. I will say that I'm being in Georgia. We hear about these political contests all the time, but we actually have a state government that operates very similar to what you're talking about. Republicans and Democrats, there are a few in there that kind of cause problems for the sake of causing problems, but they do have very good relationships with one another, and you can see that in a number of ways. Any day you go down to the Capitol, people have a good intention behind what it is that they do. And you see it in city councils, right? Which is why it is that I'm happy to support you, because I know that local government will work better with people like you involved, even if there are people that have a different perspective on policy solutions. But it goes back to exactly what you said. There was a level of trust, level of respect. And what are we if we don't have the ability to have trust and respect for one another? We just turn into animals, and then that's not what being a human is, right? I mean, we're privileged and gifted with our Creator to have the ability to craft societies that are not only physically good for us, but conceptually and philosophically and emotionally good for us. And if we lose sight of that, what the hell are we doing here? So
yeah, I know it's one of the things we bring up my city here in Snellville. One of the things that I embraced about taking this journey, which I've never taken before, is that this is, number one, a nonpartisan election. And I have spoken to nearly everyone in Snellville's government. And we don't agree on some things. We just don't, because our perspectives are different. But it's not that we may disagree, but we're not being disagreeable. And there seems to be a mutual respect for my opinion. I'm going to respect your opinion. Let's sit down and talk about why I feel this way or why you feel this way. And it's a learning endeavor. And I learned that, gosh, I can go back to my military days, West Point Prep School, where it was a totally different environment than I had grown up with. And being able to listen to other people's life perspective. Your life perspective is based on how they grew up and where they grew up. And sometimes people have no understanding of what's over here because they've never been over there, and someone needs to bring that to them in a respectful way. I mean, how can you talk about poverty to someone who's never had to worry about where their meals come from?
Yeah, exactly.
You need to have someone with whom either that you're willing to listen to, or you have to have gone through that yourself. And when I say someone to listen to, someone who you respect, someone who's going to be basically what we call a straight shooter. We all are better off by learning from each other and each other's life experiences. That's how we get things done.
100%.
I'm sorry. That's how we get things done.
100%.
Can we talk a little bit more about your organization and actually what you do?
Yeah. So in a 30-second overview of the history of these companies, I was living in Illinois. I'd always had a passion for politics. I got a little burned out, worked for an engineering firm, started to learn the things that I was doing wrong in politics, met some school board candidates who said we needed a consultant. And I literally shot from the hip and said, I can be a consultant. How do I get you elected? And then from there, it's taken on, step by step, cycle by cycle. It's taken on a life of its own. And now we have these three companies, one that does direct mail marketing, one that does digital marketing, and one that does political consulting. But all of them share the same principle, the same philosophy that we want to do, or we want to help good people do great things in the world. So from a digital perspective, that means how do we help our clients better connect with their audiences in the digital space with mail? How do we help our clients connect with their audiences in print and in politics? The specific application of how do we use all of these tools to help people connect better with voters so that they can be in a position to do amazing things.
How about a website?
You can go to our website, lesix.com. That's lesix.com. There's links to all of the different companies there, as well as a marketing platform that you can sign up for that gives you every single tool you need to win your campaign or grow your company without breaking the bank. We constantly do free learning, free opportunities to get more information. So visit each of our websites. If you're looking to run for office, lesixmedia.com. If you're looking to grow your business, lesix.agency or lesixdirect.com. Either way, we have a bunch of different websites. We have a bunch of different capabilities. At the end of the day, our goal is to help you do amazing things and make this world a better place for yourself and the people that you work with.
My goodness, I wish we had started off with that. Maybe that's a good that's a good profound way to come up this afternoon. I'm just so happy that we finally got this together.
Absolutely.
And we're able to do this. It's come out to be better and more informative than even I thought it would be.
I meant it when I said it, that you had a profound impact on me when you told your story, because your story sounded like it was oftentimes a lonely one, a difficult one.
Yeah, it was.
But when you're able to remind people like me, because again, I'm my old man was a car salesman. I'm diabetic, so I can never really serve in any sort of, I couldn't serve in the military. Wasn't really able to qualify for any sort of police service. I don't have that story of public service. You actually inspired me to start looking at the ways that I do things to stand up for what's right. And I, like anybody, are imperfect. So when I see a man like you stand up and fight against all odds and recount that story in your book, it's a blessing to be able to get to be introduced to you and to maintain this relationship with you all of these years and these occasional conversations. You make the world a better place, and I'm privileged to be part of that.
Well, you can't see it on my face, but you can see the palms of my hands are turning red. Can you give us your website one more time? Because I really want our viewers to get it.
Lesix.com. That's lesix.com. And from there, you can navigate to any one of our companies and ask, connect with us in any particular way that you want to. Ask whatever questions you have. We're always here to help people find their path to do what it is that they want, business and politics and public service. And we'd love to be able to connect with as many of you as we can.
Thank you so much, Robert. We got to do this again. I'm sure there's a whole lot of stuff that we could really jump in and get into
Absolutely.
as we go along. So Man, well, I know we'll stay in touch with each other. That's for darn sure.
Absolutely.
But I really like to participate with you again on a forum such as this, because I think it's enlightening for a lot of people, And I think that we need to get a better look and a better appreciation of who people are, where they come from, and understand people's perspective, especially political perspectives. Political perspectives are what makes this country what it is.
Mhm.
And the ability to come together, even when coming together is difficult.
Absolutely.
Sometimes that makes it much better, and we're all the better for it. So thank you so much for joining us here on WCEG. We'll need to do it again.
Thank you for having me. It means a lot. Thank you.
And I don't want to close out. I do want to close out with just one little remark before I get out. We mentioned this before about the conflicts in Israel, especially right now. It affects me personally. I have so many friends and associates who have roots in Israel, formerly known as Palestine, and I'd like to do something a little different as I close out this installment of WCEG. I'd like to go to the Aramaic translation of Matthew 6, in the words of Yeshua HaMashiach ben Elohim, verses 7 through 13. And he says, when you are praying, do not babble on and on like the pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Therefore, pray in this way. Our Father, who is throughout the universe, let your name be set apart. Come your kingdom or counsel. Let your desire be as is in the universe, also on earth. Give us bread for our necessities this day, and free us from our offenses as also we have freed our offenders. And do not let us enter into our temptation or worldliness, but set us free from error. For belongs to you the kingdom, power, and song from ages to ages. Amen. Long live Israel, which was the ancient home of our Palestinian Savior, Yeshua HaMashiach ben Elohim, also known as Jesus the Messiah, Son of God, Baruch Hashem Adonai, Shalom. Thank you.